They had dispatched Care Flight to come get me, but Care Flight was grounded because of the snowstorm. So an ambulance picked me up and took me to the hospital. In an ambulance, I heard and met God for the first time in my life. You know, it's funny what we put our value in. You know, growing up, I had a wonderful home. You know, I had parents that loved me, but I was always chasing and searching, you know, and I was a natural athlete. I was playing football for many, many years, and I wanted to go pro as what, you know, as a young kid I was dreaming of. I wound up having a left ankle fusion. So they had to drill bones out of my hip and then stick them into my ankle, and they fused together. And, you know, I had to learn how to walk again. And that was a wild experience. So football aspirations, they were gone. I see how I put so much into my performance. I got the attaboy, I got the congratulations, I got the recognition, and that's how I felt my worth. As I progressed into my teenage years, you can only imagine where that took me. It took me down a horrible path. You know, my mom and dad, they love the Lord, and they always took my sister and I to church. But at that time, in culture, especially in the church, and I'm just speaking from the heart, it was so strict and it was so rule-bound that I knew at an early age, there's absolutely no way that I can measure up to this. And so I'm just not gonna try. And that's a scary place to be, because I knew there was a God and I didn't want anything to do with him. And so as a young man and as a teenager who's seeking worth and stability in my performance, you know, I'm having to learn how to walk again. Led me down some crazy paths. As a wild teenager, I found myself running with some guys who were also wild men. They weren't teenagers, they were grown men. And they were bull riders. And this is crazy. So my family moved around a lot. Good news for my father, he kept getting promoted and we kept moving. And so I found myself in northern Colorado, and you take this boy from Texas, and some guys that I was with, they said, hey, we should go ride bulls. There's a big rodeo down here. And I'm like, ride bulls? You're crazy. And so we did. And it was awesome. We did really well. And we kind of got hooked on it. And so this wild teenager, cussing, fighting against the world and everything in my path, because to be honest, I didn't feel loved at all. I found acceptance with a group of guys who were rough and rowdy cowboys. For the next 2 or 3 years, I was a bull rider, and I was riding with grown men. And, you know, I couldn't run anymore because of my ankle fusion, but I could ride bulls. And for me, it represented so much. It represented trauma and anarchy. And for 8 seconds, I would strap myself to a 2,000-pound animal that wanted me off of him, and I would focus on all the trauma in my life and all the horrible energy that I had in my life and show that animal that I could conquer him. And one night, he conquered me. I drew a bull, a brand new bull called Black Muley, that Wild West Rodeo Company had just purchased, and no one knew how he bucked. And I drew that bull. I did really well. And he was bucking toward the gate, and he threw me into the gate, and was wearing a hockey helmet. And this was kind of brand new to the sport 20 years ago, right? Because I broke my face about 6 months before, and I had surgery to put everything back together. And as I'm looking through this hockey helmet, I have a gate to my right, and I look up and I have a bull above me. And I was swimming in the dirt trying to get out, and he jumped on my back, and I could feel everything in there, just pain like I've never felt before. And all I could think about was, you gotta get out of this arena, this bull's gonna kill you. So I get up, and I'm like this, because he stepped on me right here, and everything's hurt, and I go about 5 feet, and I just collapse. It was a snowy night in February in northern Colorado, and they had called the ambulance to come pick me up, and they had dispatched Care Flight to come get me. But Care Flight was grounded because of the snowstorm. So an ambulance picked me up and took me to the hospital. Pain like I've never had in my life. In an ambulance, I heard and met God for the first time in my life. And as a young teenage guy, you know, all the pain that I was experiencing, it just kind of went away. And I felt in my heart and in my spirit God whisper to me, what is all this for? This rage you have and this anger and this anarchy, and I'm going to do things my way. Why? Because you're dying now. And I remember feeling so hopeless. I've never been in a bottomless pit like that moment in my life, because I thought I was dying. And I didn't want to live like that. For the first time in my life, I saw who I was. And just like that, all the pain was back. We get to the hospital, we go through x-rays and CTs and MRIs and everything. And I just broke some ribs, thank the good Lord. But I had this moment of God, like, what do you do with this? Well, I find out 3 months later, we're moving back to Texas. It's the summer before my senior year. And so I find a youth group because I knew pretty girls went to youth group and I was a young teenage boy. So I was like, let's go to youth group. But what I didn't know is the Lord was about to change my life forever. It's small, right? It was the 90s, late 90s. There's like 8 teenagers in this youth group. And there was a man named Brad who was giving the gospel message on a Wednesday night. For whatever reason, it was just pounding me in my chest. You got to understand who I was. I was running with drug dealers. I was running with drug runners, drug addicts, alcoholics, grown men. A life of trauma was my life. And now I'm hearing that there's a God who loves me as I am. What do you do with that? I looked around the room and I see all these teenagers who love the Lord. And I'm like, I could never be like them. I am so broken. I am so filthy. There's no way there's a God in heaven who could love me for who I am. And Brad, the speaker, said, some of you are running from God tonight. And he was looking dead at me. Brad was this big man. He was a bodybuilder. And I looked at him and I walked down in the middle of him speaking. And I said, if your God is just, and I know he is, he would never want me. And he just looked at me and he wrapped me in his arms. And I felt the love of God for the first time in my life. And I felt God saying to my life, there is no ocean deeper than my love for you. There is no mountain higher that my love can't reach you. I love you deeper than anything you can imagine. And I want you as my own. It was like thunder in my life. And right then and there, I gave my life to Jesus Christ, right then and there. And when I did, I felt 500 pounds of weight and darkness ripped out of my body. I did. I feel it to this day. I think the people who walk on the wild side, who walk in trauma, and that's their life, and then they are set free from all of that, can't explain it. Other than it's freedom. After giving my life to Jesus Christ, I was going into my senior year, and somebody told me, hey, you need to listen to KLTY radio. And I was new to the area and I said, okay, cool, what's that? And they were like, oh, it's Christian radio. They play songs that you'd like. I went, okay, cool. And so I'm going to school one day and I've got KLTY turned on. And the morning show host at the time, his name was John Rivers. And tragically, his friend Rich Mullins had passed away. And I'm listening to all of this audio that John had been playing about Rich, how much he meant to him. And as I'm listening to this guy, Rich, talk, he's not like the typical Christian guy that I normally see in church. Like, he's a rough cat, right? And he loves God. And so through Rich's death, I began to, I went to a Christian bookstore and I got books with him and articles with him and CDs with him. And his music mentored and discipled me through his death. And so I really got a true picture of Jesus through Rich instead of kind of what the church was trying to give me, all those years where I kind of had a hatred toward the church. And I'm like, man, I want to follow this man, Jesus. And so I started to read the Gospels and really fall in love with Jesus, and as a young man be discipled. You fast forward, now I started to play guitar and I started to lead worship. Some friends of mine that were younger than me, they said, hey, listen, we're in a punk rock band and we need a bass player for tonight. Our bass player, he can't make it. Will you fill in? I was like, sure, like, why not? And I learned their music and we had a ball. I wound up joining that band as the bass player and the singer. And we traveled the country in a punk rock band, Christian punk rock band. And we met our wives on the road. And it's crazy cool to see how God weaved it all together, from a kid with hurt and trauma and anarchy to rodeo and bull riding to finding Jesus to now I'm in a Christian punk rock band traveling the country trying to get a record deal, and we meet our wives. Now you can't make that up. But we were kind of an unconventional Christian band. You know, for so many years, we would try to play at churches and we would try to play like Christian colleges, but it was the later 90s, man. They weren't ready for that sound. So I went, you know what? The people who look like me and the people who are like me are never going to step foot into a church. So let's go to them and let's bring this message in Jesus to them. So we would play in bars and we would play in skate parks, we would play in house parties, and we would play clubs. And if the church would let us in, we'd play churches too. And we got to evangelize for about 4 years through punk rock music, the message of Jesus and hope. It's so wild to know that now, 24 years later, I am doing mornings at 94.9 KLTY, bringing you the same message that Jesus loves you as you are and not as you should be. And there's nothing that you could do, there's no mountain you can climb or ocean you could swim in that is too deep for God to reach you there. And that's my message for you. I look at the heritage of KLTY and all of the people who have come before, who have paved the way. And now I want to pick up the torch and continue the legacy in a different way, to say you don't have to be super polished. You do not have to even go to church. You can be who you are, where you are, and experience the love of Christ. And the trauma that you may have in your life, and you know the one that I'm talking about, God can heal even that trauma. Trust me. If he can do it for me, he can do it for you. So my call to you is your life's message. What's it read? If your life could speak, what would it say? I pray that Jesus Christ come into your life and grab your life and say, this life is mine.